In the book of Daniel, the first year of King Belshazzar's reign, in 550 BC, a revelation of the historical situation to come was given through Daniel's vision of the four great beasts, the four cruel and ferocious beasts, namely the lion, bear, leopard, and beast with 10 horns. Tell of the rise and fall of the four empires, namely Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And in Daniel 5, human fingers appeared on the wall of the palace, where King Belshazzar's feast was taking place. And then, the writing of the prophecy appeared, saying that the Babylonian Empire would be destroyed by Medo-Persia. And in today's text Daniel 8, God once again gave Daniel a special vision in 54 BC. The third year of King Belshazzar's reign. It was that the era of King Belshazzar would not last long, and the end of the Babylonian Empire would come. In terms of overall structure, Daniel 7 and 8 have almost the same structure. Strictly speaking, the two texts are continuous. In other words, Daniel 8 is an extension of Daniel 7. In Daniel 8, the history of the Median, Persian, and Hellenistic empires, which are among the empires described in Daniel 7, is highlighted, and the history of Antiochus IV of the Seleucid Empire is described in more detail. In Daniel 7, the name of the angel who interprets the vision to Daniel is not mentioned, but in Daniel 8, the name of the angel is mentioned. And in the main text verse 2, in my vision, I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision I was beside the Ulai Canal. Shushan was a city about 350 kilometers north of Babylon, and the capital of the ancient empire Elam. It was occupied by Babylon's Nebuchadnezzar and came under his control, but was rebuilt by Persia's Darius I and used as the winter palace of the Persian kings. Archaeologists have unearthed the Hammurabi Code here, which is said to have been taken from ancient Babylon by the Elamites in the 13th century BC. According to the Old Testament, Esther and Nehemiah lived in Susani. The destruction of the Babylonian Empire, which had destroyed the temple and brought Judah to ruin, was now approaching. Daniel was standing alone on the banks of the Ulai River in a vision. God had given Daniel a special vision on the banks of the Ulai River, so that he could quietly realize the secrets of the future. In verse 2 of the text, Daniel's body was in the city of Susa in the province of Elam, but the place where the vision unfolded was on the banks of the Ulai River. There was a ram with 2 horns standing on the riverbank, and one of the horns was longer than the other, and that ram was so great that it conquered the west, north, and south, except for the east. But after that, a goat appears from the west, full of confidence. But the ram's appearance is so fast that it hits the goat with such a furious speed that its feet cannot touch the ground. At that moment, the ram is completely knocked down by the goat. As a result, the goat, which had a large horn, loses one of its horns, and 4 horns will now rise in his place. That is what is said in verse 8 of the main text. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And then, out of the 4 horns, a small horn came out and occupied fertile lands such as the south and the east. And how arrogant that horn was, it even confronted God's army in verse 11. This is the content of the vision that appears in verses 3 through 14, and from verse 15. The angel Gabriel appears to interpret the vision Daniel saw. First, the angel Gabriel gave Daniel an interpretation of his vision of the banks of the Ulai River. God sent Gabriel to make the vision clear. The rams with 2 horns that appeared in the vision are the Persian Empire that brought down the Babylonian Empire. Therefore, in verse 20 of the text, it says, the 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. Who are the rams with 2 horns referring to? They are the kings of Media and Persia. In the vision of the 4 beasts in chapter 7, the second beast corresponds to Medes and Persians. Daniel 7:5 says, and there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. Was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. In verse 3, it says, one of the horns was longer than the other but grew up later. This longer horn that came later refers to Persia, which was stronger than Media and Persia, and would later be unified as the Persian Empire. At first, Media and Persia grew into equal nations, but later Persia came to dominate the entire world. So Persia came to dominate and occupy the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Egypt in North Africa, except for the east. And in the main text verse 21, a hairy male goat refers to whom? Hera is the queen. In verse 21, it says, the shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. Who is the great horn between his eyes? It is Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia, who conquered many countries and established a global empire. In fact, Alexander made Darius III, the last king of Bactria, disappear into the back of history by defeating him in the battles of Issus in 333 BC and Arbela in 331 BC. So in verses 6 and 7, it says, it came toward the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at it in great rage. 7 I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it. And none could rescue the ram from its power. The Persian Empire, which seemed to be eternal, was destroyed by Macedonia led by Philip II and Alexander the Great. The son of Philip II became the vanguard of the conquest at the age of 20. So, Persia, Tyrus, Egypt, and India were all conquered over a period of 13 years. And the Hellenic Empire was established in name and reality. However, Alexander the Great died at the young age of 33. And the Hellenic Empire was divided into 4 parts by 4 generals. In verse 8, it says, "The goat became very great, but at the height of its power. The large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. The great horn of Alexander, who was conquering with a force that seemed to pierce the sky, was broken. And instead, 4 remarkable horns came up toward the 4 directions of the sky. Alexander, who conquered a vast territory of 4 million kilometers, died of fever. At the time, Alexander had 2 young sons. However, the young sons could not govern the vast territory. In the end, Alexander's 2 sons were killed, and Alexander's 4 generals divided his empire. The so-called northern Syria and Mesopotamia were ruled by Seleucus, Egypt. Palestine and southern Syria were ruled by Ptolemy, Asia Minor was ruled by Lysimachus, and Macedonia and Greece were ruled by Cassander. Of the 4 kingdoms, the ones related to the history of the Bible are the Ptolemaic and Seleucid dynasties. The first dynasty to occupy Israel was the Ptolemaic dynasty. The dynasty was tolerant of foreign religions, so it relocated the Jews to Alexandria. Moreover, Ptolemy II had the Old Testament, which was written in Hebrew, translated into Greek, the world's common language at the time. That is the famous Septuagint Bible. Second, the little horn that comes out of one of the 4 horns in verse 9 will greatly persecute and afflict God's people. This symbolizes the appearance of the Antichrist and the persecution of God's people in the end times. In verse 13 it says, "Then I heard a Holy One speaking. And another Holy One said to him, How long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled, the vision concerning the daily sacrifice? The rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary and the trampling underfoot of the Lord's people?" Daniel asked when the tribulation that the Lord's people were suffering would end. Through the conversation between the 2 angels, he learned the length of the tribulation. One angel asked another angel. Another angel answers this question in verse 14. He said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated." It is said that the religious suffering of the Jews will last for 2,300 days. And that the suffering will end when the sanctuary is purified. The 2,300 days and nights here refer to a period of about 6 years. The Jews must suffer extreme hardship for 6 years. After the death of Alexander, the 4 divided countries fought each other, and in 198 BC, the king of Seleucus, Antiochus III, fought against Ptolemy V at Panias, and Antiochus III won. As a result, the rule of Palestine passed to the Seleucus dynasty. Many changes occurred at that time. The Ptolemaic dynasty was tolerant of the Jews and their religion, while the Seleucid dynasty oppressed the Jews, in an attempt to forcibly implant Hellenistic culture. At this time, they also looted all the temple treasures. In particular, the king of Seleucus, Antiochus IV, called himself Epiphanes, claiming that he was the manifestation of the gods. And when Antiochus IV ascended the throne, Jason, the younger brother of the high priest Onias, became ambitious to become the high priest himself, and gave the king 440 talents of silver to become the high priest. Yashan, who was fascinated by the culture of Greece, proposed to create a royal youth guard in Judah, and promised to give 150 talents if he was given the authority to create the guard. This is recorded in the Maccabees. When the king gave his consent, he returned to Judah and abolished the system based on the Torah and created a system based on the culture of Greece. In other words, he carried out the edict of Antiochus IV. 3 years later, Yason sent Menelaus to the king to pay the promised money and get some important issues approved. However, Menelaus paid 300 talents more than the money sent by Yason and took the position of high priest for himself. Onias, who was originally the high priest, was killed for criticizing this behavior. This was in 170 BC. From this point on, the suffering of the pious Jews began in earnest. Antiochus IV desecrated the Holy of Holies by mobilizing his army. Dan. 1131, abolished the daily sacrifice in 167 BC, and on December 8, he set up a statue of Zeus on the altar of the temple and had people worship it. Dan. 1131. They even made it a capital offense for anyone to keep the law, and they made it a law that every month on the 25th, a pig was to be sacrificed on the temple altar to commemorate the king's birthday. That Epiphanees is the little horn that comes out of one of the 4 horns in verse 9 of today's text. So in verses 23 to 25 of the text, Gabriel's interpretation says that the destruction will end with the appearance of that Epiphanees. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. 24 He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. 25 He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. The 4 nations mentioned here refer to the 4 sovereigns who emerged after the death of Alexander of the Hellenistic Empire. At that time, after the division, it was said that a king will rise, referring to the Seleucid dynasty that soon came to rule. Antiochus IV, who came from that dynasty, confronted God himself as Epiphanes, forbidding the law, abolishing various godly feasts and sacrifices, erecting a statue of Zeus, and committing the heinous act of sacrificing pigs. So, they are trying to completely crush and eradicate the faith of the Jews. But he said that it would also be destroyed. Eventually, the Maccabees' independence movement drove out the Epiphanes' army and won independence. And the Maccabees purified the temple on December 14, 164 BC, and rededicated it. It took 6 years. The prophecy that the sanctuary would be purified after 2,300 days and nights by the angel refers to the period from the martyrdom of Onias to the reconsecration of the temple by the Maccabees. In any case, Epiphanes, who abused his power not through his own strength but through God's providence, dies of illness. Not through the hands of a human being. 24-25. Some say that the insects ate the intestines and died. However, at this time, the Jews, God's people, will suffer greatly. This period is referred to as the 400-year interlude. This is called the God's silence period. God did not send a prophet during that period, and he just kept silent, which allowed the Greek Empire to trample on God and even destroy faith. So, was God really just silent during that time? Did God do nothing? God did not remain silent because he could not change history at that time, nor because he was incompetent. All history on this earth is God's history. Everything is carried out by his will. Then, what did God do during the 400 years of silence? At this time, God prepared the stage for the coming of Jesus and the spread of God's gospel to the Gentile nations beyond Jerusalem, which was the center of the Old Testament. So, when Babylon fell to the Persian Empire, they rebuilt the temple and laid the foundation for teaching and interpreting God's law. And when the Hellenistic Empire ruled, they translated the Septuagint into the logical and orderly Greek language. The Greek, instead of the dying Hebrew language. And when the Hellenistic Empire was followed by the Roman Empire, which dominated the world, they built wide roads to lay the foundation for the rapid spread of the gospel. In this way, God's work was secretly carried out during the 400-year interlude. Likewise, God is working in his will and providence even today. Therefore, we must not forget that our lives today are small seeds for the history of the kingdom of God, and we must live boldly in any environment. Third, Epiphanes is the embodiment of the Antichrist who persecutes God's people in tribulation. In the 11th verse of the text, it says, "And he exalted himself against the prince of the army, and he destroyed daily sacrifice, and the sanctuary was thrown down." The content of today's text is the illusion of a ram and a goat. The ram had 2 horns. However, one of them was longer. Media and Baasha first appeared as allies, but eventually Persia ate them all up. The painting depicts the historical fact that Persia ate up Media, and a bighorn goat with horns between its eyes rushes in and kills a ram with 2 horns. This white goat is Greece, led by Alexander the Great. But then its horns fall off and it has 4 horns. After Alexander the Great died, his empire was divided into 4 parts. One of the 4 parts was Syria, which was ruled by Antiochus Epiphanes, the 8th king of the 4 parts. It is said that his horns extended to the south and east. In terms of the Greek region, it is as if the Palestine region was swallowed up by the east. At the same time, the temple was demolished and the Zeus shrine was built inside the temple. And pigs were slaughtered and sacrificed, which is a historical event. Daniel is now seeing this event unfold. Daniel has no idea who Antiochus Epiphanes is. Alexander doesn't know either. Alexander the Great died in 323 BC. Daniel is looking at the 3rd year of King Belshazzar, which is around 550 BC, so he has no idea. He is looking at something he has no idea about. What he is looking at is that Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple and covered the temple walls with pig's blood. And the key to this is that he eliminated the daily sacrifices. However, Antiochus Epiphanes, the embodiment of this Antichrist, eliminated the daily sacrifices and demolished his sanctuary. Eliminating the daily sacrifices means eliminating the relationship with God. If the relationship with God is dead, it is as if you are alive but dead. It is not the body that dies. If the relationship with God dies, this body is not alive even if it is alive. If you are preoccupied with worldly matters to build a stable life in this world, you are not alive even if you are alive. While preoccupied with family, business, children, health, future, and work problems, the relationship with God disappears. When worship and sacrifice, which are the relationship with God, disappear, the sanctuary collapses. Therefore, we must have daily sacrifices. Every day, we must die and be able to grasp the will of God. The daily ritual of Sangwanji is a way of keeping our hearts and minds always toward God in the face of the trials of the world that shake our faith. What do we offer in the daily sacrifice of Sangwanji? We offer a burnt offering by putting the cross of Christ in the Word. Today, we are crucified with Christ, nailing our old self, our stubbornness and our ego to the cross and burning them with the fire of the Holy Spirit so that our ego dies. This is the daily sacrifice of Sangwon-ji. Daily sacrifice is to die with the cross and hold on to the will of the Lord in the fire of the Holy Spirit. Antiochus Epiphanes, the embodiment of this Antichrist, calls himself the little horn. Why is it expressed as the little horn in verse 9? In the 23 verse of the text, it says, in the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. This is because of his lowly origins. In other words, he was the king's youngest son, so he had no right to succeed to the throne, but he rose to power through deceit and cunning schemes. This is a very cunning move that will increase his power. In other words, he will maximize his military power to attack Egypt to the south, Elam and Armenia to the east, and Judah, which is likened to a glorious land, and Jerusalem, where the temple is located, in particular. In verses 9 and 10, it says, out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. 10 It grew until it reached the host of the heavens, and it threw some of the starry host down to the earth and trampled on them. But above all, it is said to be good at deception. In verse 24, it says, he will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. This is a type of the Antichrist who will appear in the last days. The Antichrist who will appear at the end of time will also be shameless, deceptive, and powerful, but his power will not be his own, and he will destroy and persecute God's people. He will also be self-important in his heart, oppose God, and oppose the King of Kings. He will abolish worship, desecrate the temple, trample on the truth, and cast the truth to the ground. And Antiochus Epiphanes issued an edict to vigorously promote the Hellenization of all the nations under his rule, unifying all religions, laws, and customs. This Antiochus Epiphanes is the prototype of the Antichrist who will appear in the last days. We must pray for that time and arm ourselves with faith. The Antichrist, the enemy of the last days, will promote a single world government and a single world religion, and receive votes to control people and make them worship and serve the Antichrist, who is the beast. He will behead or kill those who oppose him. Revelation chapter 13:15 says, the second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. Therefore, we must also be people of faith who are prepared for tribulation.